"Get this kid out of my ER. I don't have time to babysit every charity case that walks through those doors." The fluorescent lights of the Hargrove Memorial Hospital emergency room buzzed overhead like something indifferent to human suffering. A 12-year-old boy named Marcus sat on a gurney in Bay 3, his right hand wrapped in a blood-soaked cloth, his breathing controlled and deliberate in the way that children who have been taught to be strong in public breathe when they are frightened. His mother, Diane, stood beside him with her hand on his shoulder. She had not let go of him since the car. The surgeon who had spoken was Dr. Elliot Fenn, Chief of Trauma Surgery, 48 years old, board certified, and in the habit of speaking about patients in a register that suggested they were inconveniences rather than human beings in pain. Diane looked at him. "My son's hand may have a severed tendon. He needs to be seen. He's been triaged. The laceration is non-life-threatening." Dr. Fenn said it without looking at Marcus. "There are 3 critical cases ahead of him. He can wait in the general queue." "The general queue is 4 hours, the intake nurse said quietly. "Then he waits 4 hours, Fenn said, and he turned. Marcus looked at his hand. He didn't cry. He had learned, without anyone ever telling him, that some rooms did not have space for his pain. He pressed the cloth tighter. What Dr. Elliot Fenn did not know, could not have known, looking at a 12-year-old boy and a tired woman in a waiting room chair, was that the man who had built this hospital was standing 40 feet down that corridor. That the name above the entrance to Hargrove Memorial was not a historical footnote. It was a living person, and he had just heard every word. In 90 seconds, Dr. Fenn's pager would go off. The number on the screen would be the one he had never once expected to see on a Tuesday evening. Have you ever watched someone you love be dismissed in a moment when they needed help most? Hold on to that, because what happened in Bay 3 of Hargrove Memorial will not leave you quickly. Let me take you back to the beginning of this story. Marcus Webb had been in his school's woodshop class at 3:45 that afternoon. He was a careful student, methodical in the way his grandfather had taught him, measure twice, cut once. But a machine guard had failed, the board had kicked, and Marcus had reached instinctively to stop it. The laceration was deep, running across the base of his palm and into the first 2 fingers. His teacher had wrapped it immediately, called an ambulance, called Diane. Diane Webb was a nursing assistant at a long-term care facility on the other side of the city. She had left her shift the moment she got the call, still in her scrubs. She met the ambulance at Hargrove Memorial and had not left her son's side for a single moment since. She knew hospitals. She knew how they worked, who had authority, what the intake process looked like from the inside. She had spent 11 years watching people navigate the system, and she knew that the way you were received at the door determined almost everything that followed. She had felt it the moment they walked in, the particular quality of the attention they received or did not receive. The triage nurse had been professional. The intake clerk had been professional. But Dr. Fenn had looked at her son and made a calculation that had nothing to do with medicine. She kept her hand on Marcus's shoulder. She breathed. She waited. Marcus was the kind of boy who built things. His grandfather, Joseph Webb, had been a carpenter in North Carolina for 50 years, a man whose hands knew wood the way a musician knows an instrument, instinctively, intimately, with a reverence for the material and an understanding that patience was not optional. He had taught Marcus everything in the summers Marcus spent with him: how to read the grain, how to let the wood tell you which direction it wanted to go, how to sand with the grain, never against it, how to measure twice and cut once, because wood does not forgive impatience, and neither does life. Joseph Webb had died 3 years ago when Marcus was 9. He had left his grandson his toolbox, a worn metal chest, green with age, every compartment holding something that had been used and used until it was an extension of the man who held it. Marcus kept that toolbox in his room. He would not let anyone move it. He had carried a small folding ruler from it in his jacket pocket since the day of the funeral, the way some kids carry lucky coins. When the machine guard failed and the board kicked, Marcus had not been distracted. He had been focused, careful, doing everything right. Some things go wrong regardless. His grandfather had told him that too. You cannot prepare against everything. You can only prepare to handle it. He was handling it now, on the gurney in Bay 3, pressing the cloth, breathing, not crying. Down the corridor, Dr. James Hargrove moved through his hospital the way he always did when he visited, quietly, without advance notice. His name badge turned so that it showed only his photo, not his title. He was 76 years old, tall and deliberate in his movements, with the kind of unhurried attention in his eyes that comes from a lifetime of looking carefully at things. James Hargrove had built this hospital from a single-floor clinic in 1974. He had grown up in Charleston, the son of a man who drove a taxi and a woman who cleaned houses, and he had earned his medical degree at Howard University when people told him that was an ambitious dream for someone from his particular background. He had done his residency, his fellowship, his early career, and then at 35 years old he had come home to Charleston and opened a free clinic in a building that had previously been a hardware store. He had named it the Hargrove Community Health Center. It had treated 43 patients in its first week. It had grown slowly and painfully and magnificently over the next 40 years into what now stood here, a full-service hospital with 412 beds and a trauma center and a pediatric wing and a research department and an endowment that supported free and reduced-cost care for patients who could not afford treatment. He had built it because he remembered what it felt like to need care and be turned away. He had never forgotten that feeling. He had built an entire institution against it, and now he was standing in the doorway of Bay 3. He had heard Dr. Fenn's voice from the corridor. He had heard the word charity case. He had stood and listened to the entire exchange, the 4-hour wait, the turned back, the nurse's quiet intervention that Fenn had dismissed with a wave. He had stood and watched Diane Webb put her hand on her son's shoulder and breathe, in the practiced way of a person who has learned that her distress is not welcome in certain rooms. He had seen that before. He had seen it in 1974 when he opened the clinic. He had seen it in 1989 when he first applied for hospital accreditation. He had seen it in 100 forms, in 100 rooms, in 100 years of American medicine. He walked to Bay 3. Dr. Fenn was dictating notes at the station 10 feet away and did not look up until he heard footsteps stop beside the gurney. He glanced over with the expression of a man about to tell an orderly to move along. The expression did not stay. James Hargrove stood next to Marcus Webb's gurney and looked at the boy's wrapped hand with the calm assessment of a physician who had been practicing medicine for 41 years. "May I?" he asked Diane, gesturing toward Marcus's hand. "Please," she said. He unwrapped the cloth gently, examined the laceration with a small penlight from his breast pocket, pressed 2 fingers lightly to the boy's palm, and asked Marcus to try to flex each finger in sequence. Marcus complied, face tight with effort. James Hargrove rewrapped the hand with the easy efficiency of someone who had done this 10,000 times. He looked at Marcus. "You're brave," he said simply, "and this needs a hand surgeon tonight, not in 4 hours." He stood and looked at Dr. Elliot Fenn. The doctor had not spoken in 45 seconds. "I'm Dr. Hargrove," the old man said. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just a statement of fact, the way you give your name when you want to be clearly understood. The fluorescent lights kept buzzing. Somewhere down the hall a monitor beeped. Fenn's face had gone a color that had nothing to do with the lighting. He had worked at Hargrove Memorial for 6 years. He had attended the annual gala twice. He had walked past the oil portrait in the main lobby, the tall man with the quiet eyes, more times than he could count. He had never connected that face to the possibility of a Tuesday evening in Bay 3. James Hargrove paged the on-call hand surgeon himself. He pulled Diane Webb's contact information from the intake screen and told her directly that Marcus would be seen within the hour, that the hospital would cover all costs under its community care provision, and that someone from administration would follow up with her personally within 24 hours. He said it matter-of-factly, as if it were simply what should have been true from the beginning. Then he turned back to Dr. Fenn and said, "My office, after your shift." That was all. No performance, no speech, just 4 words that Dr. Elliot Fenn would turn over in his mind for the rest of the evening. Marcus Webb had surgery that night. The hand surgeon who operated on him, Dr. Priya Nair, 38 years old and one of the most skilled practitioners in her specialty in the state, repaired the laceration, confirmed there was no tendon damage, and told Diane that with proper rest and physical therapy, Marcus would have full use of his hand. Diane sat in the recovery waiting room and let herself, very quietly, come apart for about 90 seconds. Then she put herself back together the way she always did. She thought about her son's face on that gurney, the way he had pressed the cloth tighter against his hand, the way he had not let himself cry. 12 years old, already learning which rooms didn't have space for his pain. She thought about the old man who had walked into Bay 3 and unwrapped her son's hand with the care and attention that should have been there from the start. She had not recognized him when he walked in. Not at first. It was only when she saw the way the entire bay seemed to recalibrate around his presence, the way the nurse stood straighter, the way Fenn's entire body stiffened, that she had looked at his badge, caught the name, and understood. The founder, the man whose name was over the door. Dr. James Hargrove met with Dr. Elliot Fenn for 40 minutes after his shift that night. What was said in that meeting was not recorded and was not shared publicly. What followed was, Dr. Fenn was placed on administrative leave pending a review of patient care complaints. The hospital's medical review board, which James Hargrove convened himself the following morning, found a pattern of documented complaints against Fenn stretching back 4 years. Complaints from nurses, from other staff members, from patients and families. 7 formal grievances, all marked reviewed, all marked resolved, none of which had resulted in any substantive action. That changed. The review board recommended termination. The hospital's board of trustees voted to accept the recommendation within 72 hours. Dr. Elliot Fenn's privileges at Hargrove Memorial were permanently revoked. Meanwhile, the video had found its way out of the hospital. An orderly who had been in the corridor, who had watched James Hargrove walk into Bay 3 and had thought to take his phone out, had captured everything from Hargrove's introduction onward. He had posted it with a brief unadorned caption. The man who built this hospital walked into the ER tonight and took care of a kid the surgeon refused to see. The video reached 2 million views in under 18 hours. What people responded to was not the ending. They knew the ending would come. They could see it in Fenn's face the moment he heard the name. What they could not stop watching was the 12-year-old boy pressing that cloth against his hand, not crying, and the old doctor who had crouched beside him and said 2 words, "You're brave." The phrase became the caption. The caption became the hashtag. The hashtag became something that people were posting in the comments alongside their own stories. The stories of being dismissed in ERs, in clinics, in offices. The stories of learning which rooms had space for them and which did not. James Hargrove gave no interviews. He issued a single written statement through the hospital. It said that the incident had revealed gaps in the hospital's patient advocacy systems that he took personal responsibility for addressing. It said that the community care provision that had covered Marcus Webb's treatment would be expanded, its eligibility criteria broadened, its administration streamlined. It said that a new patient advocate position would be created, funded directly from the endowment, staffed by advocates trained specifically in identifying and addressing inequitable care. The last paragraph said only this: this hospital was built because a boy needed care and was turned away. It will not be what he was turned away from. Not on my watch, not ever. 6 months later, the Hargrove Memorial Pediatric Wing opened a new ward. The ward was named, at James Hargrove's personal request, the Marcus Webb Children's Recovery Suite. It had 12 beds, a play area, a room for families, and walls painted in colors that a child had selected because a hospital should not feel like a place that doesn't have room for you. Marcus Webb, 13 years old by then, attended the ribbon cutting. He shook Dr. Hargrove's hand with his right one, the same hand, fully healed, no stiffness, full range of motion. James Hargrove looked at the hand and then at the boy. "Good as new," he said. "Better," Marcus said. The old doctor smiled. It was the smile of a man who had built a hospital against a feeling he had never forgotten, and who had watched, 76 years into his life, that building justify itself in the exact way he had always hoped it would. He had built it for this, for a 12-year-old boy who deserved to be seen. There is a certain kind of institution that forgets over time what it was built for. It grows. It adds departments and administrators and policies and procedures, layers and layers of process until the original purpose is buried somewhere beneath the organizational chart. The people who work in it arrive after the founding, without the founding memory, and they navigate the institution by its current rules rather than its original spirit. They do not remember the clinic in the hardware store building. They do not remember why the doors were built wide. They know only that they are powerful within these walls, and they act accordingly. James Hargrove had spent 40 years fighting that tendency in his own institution. He had visited without announcement for exactly this reason, because announced visits produced performances, and he did not want to see the performance. He wanted to see the thing itself, the real daily operation of the place he had built, the way patients were actually received and treated and sent home. He wanted to know whether the building was still doing what he had built it to do. On that Tuesday evening he had learned something he had not wanted to know, and then he had done something about it. That is the part of this story that matters most, I think. Not that a powerful man intervened and justice was done. That is the expected ending. What matters is why the powerful man was there in the first place. That he had never stopped showing up, never stopped paying attention, never decided that the institution had earned the right to run itself without him watching. 76 years old, and he still came in on Tuesday evenings without announcing himself and turned his badge around and walked the corridors of his hospital to see whether it was still the place he meant it to be. That is the work, not the founding, the maintaining, the daily choice to keep the original promise alive against everything that accumulates around it. Marcus Webb understood something about that kind of work. His grandfather had taught it to him in a different language, the language of grain and grain direction, of patience and measurement, of the folding ruler in his jacket pocket. Some lessons are the same lesson in different costumes. Measure twice. Cut once. Show up. Pay attention. Keep the promise. Marcus Webb, at 13, standing in the new ward with his healed right hand extended, understood without being told that this was what his grandfather had been teaching him all along. Not just how to work with wood, how to work with the world, how to receive a gift of care and pass it forward. How to stand in a room that was named for you and know without arrogance that you were worth the naming. His mother Diane stood beside him at the ribbon cutting. She was still wearing scrubs. She had come straight from her shift, same as the day of the accident, same as 100 days before that. She looked at her son, and she looked at the walls painted in the colors a child had chosen, and she kept her hand on his shoulder. Same hand, same shoulder. The gesture that had carried them through Bay 3. Joseph Webb would have had something to say about all of it, something dry and precise, delivered in that unhurried North Carolina way he had. He would have looked at the folding ruler in his grandson's jacket pocket and nodded once. He would have said something about grain direction. He would have meant something much larger. Some lessons are the same lesson in different costumes, that's all. That's the whole thing. If this story reached you, if it moved something in you, please share it, leave a like, and subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. And tell me in the comments, have you ever been in a room where you needed help and felt invisible? What happened? Here is what really gets me about this story. It is not Fen. Men like Fen exist in every hospital, in every institution, in every system that has not built accountability into its walls. They are almost never the lesson. The lesson is the boy, 12 years old, already pressing the cloth tighter, already breathing in that careful, controlled way. Already learning, without anyone teaching him explicitly, that some rooms are not designed to hold his pain, and the lesson is the man who walked down the corridor and heard it and chose not to walk past. James Hargrove built a hospital because he remembered being turned away. He never stopped building it, not in 1974, not in the 40 years after, and not on a Tuesday evening in Bay 3. He walked in and he did what the building was always supposed to do. He saw the boy, he wrapped the hand, he said, "You're brave, I want to ask you something real. Is there a room in your life, a system, an institution, a space, where you walk in knowing you might have to make yourself smaller to be allowed to stay? And is there someone in your life who, like James Hargrove, has walked in after you and said, no, not here, not on my watch? Tell me. Leave it in the comments, because those stories matter, every single one."